All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your lunch hour. We're going to get back to it. I think we're doing real well today. So we have remaining safety requirements and then the scope of the newly regulated gas gathering. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve or Chris.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon. Section 5 is on newly regulated gas gathering in sections 192.9C through E and 192.619. Again, this is what was proposed in the NPRM in 2016. PHMSA proposed that newly regulated gas gathering pipelines would be subject to the following requirements, similar to the requirements for Type B lines, for design, installation, construction, and initial inspection and testing for new and replaced lines. Also corrosion control per subpart I for metallic lines and composites with metallic components. For damage prevention per 192.614 and public awareness and education per 192.616. Slide 90. PHMSA also proposed to establish an MAOP per 192.619. Requirements for line markers per 192.707. For leakage surveys per 192.706 and repairs per 192.703C. In addition, the proposed newly regulated gas gathering pipelines would be subject to the following requirements which would not be applicable to Type B lines. Emergency plans per 192.615. From the MAOP bullet, the asterisk reads that PHMSA proposed to revise 192.619 to clarify MAOP requirements for newly regulated gas gathering lines, which allows for newly regulated gas gathering lines to be grandfathered for the purposes of MAOP determination, as will be discussed in more detail in the next slide. Slide 91. So what PHMSA proposed was that in 192.619, PHMSA proposed to allow operators of newly regulated pre-existing gas gathering lines to determine their MAOP based on the 5-year high operating pressure of the line prior to the effective date of the rule. That would, in effect, grandfather them to that high operating pressure. In 192.9E, PHMSA proposed that newly regulated gas gathering pipelines have 2 years to comply with those requirements in 192.9. This new paragraph should have been designated as 192.9E4 and will be corrected in the final rule. 92. Continuing with our proposals in 192.9F, PHMSA proposed that if a change in class location or an increase in dwelling density caused a Type A Area 2 line to become regulated, operators would have 1 year to comply with 192.9. And note that it's a comparable requirement for Type A and Type B lines is already addressed in the existing 192.9E3. And PHMSA intended to incorporate Type A Area 2 into this existing requirement. The proposed paragraph F should have been designated as 192.9E3 and will be corrected in the final rule. 93. With regards to the gas transmission rule impact on 192.9C, as a reminder, the 2016 NPRM is being split into 3 separate rulemakings, what we call RIN 1, 2, and 3. The gas transmission MAOP and mandates rule, RIN 1, the gas transmission repair criteria rule, RIN 2, and this gas gathering rule, RIN 3. The gas transmission portions of the NPRM have already been reviewed and voted on by the GPAC in previous meetings. Several new gas transmission requirements are not intended to apply to gas gathering pipelines as discussed with the GPAC. The gas transmission rules will also amend 192.9C to exempt gas gathering lines from the requirements not intended to apply to gas gathering. Also from the gas transmission mandates rule RIN 1 would exempt gas gathering lines from several or many requirements as listed here. 192, 150 for the required new piggable lines meet the NACE requirements. 192, 227C records for qualification of welders. 192, 285E records for qualification of plastic pipe joiners. 192, 493 inline inspection consensus standards applicability. 192, 506 spike hydro test requirements. 192, 607 material documentation. 192, 619E the MAOP confirmation, as well as the 192, 624 MAOP confirmation. 192, 710 non-HCA assessment requirements, and 192, 712 analysis of predicted failure pressure. Slide 95. Also, to continue the list of what the gas transmission repair rule would exempt gas gathering lines from: 192, 13D management of change, 192, 127 pipe design records, 192, 205 records for pipeline components, 192, 319 requirements for coating surveys after backfill, as well as the 192, 461F coating surveys after backfill. Also would be exempted the 192, 465 D2 and F on external corrosion remediation, 192, 473C interference surveys, 192, 478 internal corrosion requirements, 192, 613C extreme weather inspections, and 192, 714 non-HCA repair criteria. Slide 96. So some of the public comments to the 2016 NPRM proposed language included that new gas gathering lines that operate above 20% SMI should meet the current Type A requirements. And new gas gathering lines operating below 20% SMI should meet the current Type B requirements, as this would remove confusion associated with future class location changes. 97. PHMSA's response is that requiring all newly regulated Type A gathering lines in Class 1 locations to meet the current requirements for regulated Type A gatherings in Class 2, 3, or 4 locations would likely not be cost effective. PHMSA will consider reviewing this alternative in the regulatory impact analysis for the rule. This time, PHMSA proposes no changes for gathering lines operating less than 20% of SMICE, which are the Type B requirements. Slide 98. Continuing, PHMSA proposes a change that would require Type A Area 2 lines that become newly regulated due to an increase in dwelling density to have 2 years from the effective date of the rule to come into compliance with the requirements of 192.9 instead of 1 year as proposed in the NPRM, or effective date of that change of the rule in this case. This is the same as the existing requirements for the Type A lines. If a class location change occurs for Type B pipelines, the operator has 1 year to come into compliance with the requirements of 192.9, and this is no change to the existing requirements for Type B. Another comment was that PHMSA should also require gathering line compliance with construction and operating standards. PHMSA's comment is the NPRM proposed construction and operating standards for newer replaced Type A Area 2 gathering lines. 100. Public comment support requiring gathering line mandatory one call before your dig systems. The NPRM proposes to include the 192.614 damage prevention requirements for newly regulated gas gathering lines, which includes participation in one-call programs as well as other damage prevention activities. 101. Comments regarding new or replaced plastic pipe. Public comment that we should consider regulating only steel piping in Class 1 gathering location. And the proposed changes in 192.9D1 will have the effect of eliminating the use of composites and plastic pipes. PHMSA's response is that the longstanding requirement for regulated gathering lines apply to both steel and plastic pipelines. Any gas gathering line that meets the criteria in 192.8 would be regulated. Both steel and plastic lines would be required to meet the applicable requirements of Part 192. It's continued on 102. 192.91 is an existing requirement unchanged by the proposed rule that already applies to new, replaced, or relocated plastic lines, which must comply with the applicable requirements for plastic transmission pipelines. Based on the long-time application of this requirement for plastic gathering pipelines, PHMSA disagrees that applying this requirement to newly regulated Type A Area 2 segments would result in the elimination of plastics. 103. With regard to composite pipeline material, PHMSA recognizes that some existing lines that would become regulated might include segments constructed with composite pipe material. PHMSA does not intend to require operators to replace such pipe with newly regulated, in a newly regulated pipeline. However, existing pipeline regulations do not cover composite pipe. Therefore, PHMSA proposes to add a no objection notification process to 192.9 so that PHMSA may review the specific cases in which composite pipe material is used for existing or new Type A Area 2 gathering pipelines. 104. From the public comments, TPA and IPAA jointly proposed PHMSA to allow deviations from any requirement by submittal of a notification. And PHMSA response is that it believes that a notification requirement is appropriate for some aspects of the new requirements, but does not agree that operators should be allowed to deviate from any or all requirements using just a notification. Such deviations would require a special permit. PHMSA suggests the committee consider the use of notifications for plastic or composite pipe, since it is not PHMSA's intent to require operators of newly regulated segments to have to replace existing plastic or composite pipe. In light of the public comments to the NPRM, PHMSA suggests the committee also consider. PHMSA suggests the committee consider endorsing the minimum safety standards for regulated gas gathering pipelines as PHMSA proposed in the NPRM. The listing below is a summary of the requirements proposed for 192.9D in the NPRM. The first 8 items are the same existing Type B requirements, with the note that when things are in blue, in this case, it was added in this case because the plastic pipe rule came into effect this spring. Number 1 is design, installation, construction, and initial inspection and testing for new and replaced lines. 2 is corrosion control per subpart I for metallic and composite with metal lines only. 3 is the plastic pipe requirements. 4 is damage prevention per 192.614. Continued on 106. Number 5 is public awareness and education per 192.616. 6 is establishing an MAOP. For existing lines, it can be based on the 5-year high operating pressure of the line, which would be allowed, or in other cases per the 192.619 requirements. 7 are line marker requirements per 192.707. 8 is leakage surveys in accordance with 192.706 and repairs in accordance with 192.703C. And then for Type A, Area 2 lines only, emergency plans per 192.615. 107. PHMSA suggests the committee also consider that language such that if after the effective date of the rule, a change in class location or increase in dwelling density causes an onshore gathering line to be regulated, the operator has 2 years for newly regulated gas gathering pipelines after the line becomes a regulated onshore gathering line to comply with 192.9. Also, if a regulated onshore gathering line existing on the effective date of the rule has not previously been subject to this part, an operator has until 3 years to comply with the applicable requirements of this section unless the administrator finds a later deadline is justified in a particular case. Descriptions of 192.9C and D subsections will be updated for Type A, Area 1, or Area 2 as appropriate. Slide 108. In light of the public comments to the NPRM, PHMSA also suggests the committee consider allowing usage of existing composite pipelines. And this would require the operator to notify PHMSA in receipt of a PHMSA no objection letter for the use of composite pipe in Type A, Area 2 pipelines. And for the usage of composite pipelines for new pipelines, require the operator notification to PHMSA in receipt of a PHMSA no objection letter for the use of composite pipe in a Type A Area 2 pipeline. And note, as always, an operator would be able to apply for a special permit under 190.341. 109. Also, PHMSA recommends the committee consider extending the deadline in 192.8B for determining applicability from 6 months, which was originally proposed, to 2 years after the effective date of this rule. And extend the deadline for the conforming changes in 192.9C3, E3, E4, 192.452, and 192.13, and 192.619 to 3 years after the effective date of the rule. 110. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think at this point we would welcome any public comment from those in the room. If folks have comments to make, please take direction from Cameron there.
Cameron?
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Advisory Committee, PHMSA staff. I just wanted to make a few comments. Randy Knapp with the Plastics Pipe Institute. I wanted to highlight some areas I think the industry has had some confusion around as far as the requirements in 192.9. The addition of 192.9 D3 in the plastics rule talks about plastic must comply with all applicable requirements of this part for plastic components. Other parts of this section 192.9C or D1 say it must comply with the requirements applicable to transmission lines. And I think those two, in some cases, are confused about, is this transmission line that we're trying to look at the requirements for, or is it all plastic requirements that are currently in the code? So I think some clarification of that, making that more explicit, would be worthwhile, whether it's done here or if we go into the specific relevant sections of the code in 192.5.9 for materials, 192.6.3 on marking requirements, and 192.121 on design requirements. Because I think that would stem back to some of the questions that we had and some of the comments that were put forward by PPI. I would say also that we do support the composite no objection notification process as a step forward in recognizing composite materials. And we certainly encourage PHMSA to continue the progress being made on the IBR of some relevant product standards, and PPI has submitted a number of petitions around that, one for API 15S for spoolable composites, another for ASTM F2619, and API 15LE for polyethylene line pipe. as standards that are typically used in the industry for gas gathering applications. So again, those are active petitions with dockets in place. So I'd encourage everyone to continue to look at that. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Keith Coyle. I wanted to offer a few short comments on behalf of GPA Midstream. The first comment that we wanted to offer is we would prefer that we use Type C as the reference for these lines instead of Type A Area 2. Type A Area 2 is very confusing because these lines are not subject to the Type A requirements. They're subject to the Type B requirements. And the Area 2 reference just creates more confusion. So we would prefer if we could just call them Type C, then everybody would know what we were talking about. It would be a little bit easier for compliance people in the field. The second comment on the no objection process, we generally support the changes that have been made, but we'd like to have some more detail on how that process would work in practice. I think when we did the transmission line discussion last year, there was a discussion about a 90-day deadline. And maybe if there was no action in 90 days, it would be deemed granted. On something like this, too, there might be situations where you need to do a replacement in like an emergency circumstance where you'd need a decision from the regulator faster if you had a composite replacement that you had to make. So just some more discussion on how that process would actually work, who would be making those decisions, making sure they're consistent. And the last thing was the 5-year high on the MEOP provision. We understand that's been the traditional way that PHMSA has set grandfathered MEOPs. We do have some concerns about the nature of the operating pressure data that would be required to set a grandfathered MEOP. Some of the systems that might be brought into regulation don't have all the pressure monitoring equipment that some of the more established systems have. So what would PHMSA's expectation be in terms of documentation for the 5-year high? And if industry could have some additional compliance time to deal with the MEOP piece, whether that's 2 years to identify and then run the 3 years consecutive instead of concurrent, just to give us some more allowance so that we could make sure that we had the necessary equipment in place to provide whatever pressure data PHMSA needs for the 5-year high. So, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Clayton Bodell with Williams. Mr. Coyle almost touched on something, but he didn't quite hit what I was wanting to comment on. And so what I would like to do on slide 108, it refers to a process, this notification process, and it appears to require a receipt of a no objection letter. I'd urge the committee to consider using the same language that was approved under section 192.607, in which an operator doesn't necessarily need to receive that objection letter before proceeding. And similarly, that language is read in other sections that were approved by the committee to say, retain the notification procedures published in the NPRM, use the same 90-day no objection letter language the committee approved for 192.607 for any notification. So follow similar language as it was previously approved. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Others?
To pipelines that had not been previously covered under the rule. And we were talking about, we looked at the incident types that are most prevalent on those that are tracked, and we are implementing corrosion control requirements, damage prevention requirements, design, installation, construction, inspection, and testing requirements for new and replaced pipes. So I do think there's quite a bit of new requirements that are being put to these pipelines, and so I support generally the way that this is proposed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jonathan?
John Airy. To avoid a potential drafting mistake, I suggest on the exclusions from regulation that the newly regulated gathering lines only have to meet the expressly outlined rules. And not other requirements that are not listed in the list in case that list is incomplete.
All right, other comments? Sarah?
It's more of a question at this point, and it relates to just the compliance states. So I'm struggling a little bit with all the different compliance states. We've got questions around applicability. We've got ones that relate to the actual requirements. I wonder if you could just summarize, and I don't know whether they're running consecutively or not. Can you help me understand the timeline here in terms of when people are going to be doing these things? Oh,
Bobby, go back to slide number 109. To make sure I'm understanding is if you look, extend the deadline for conforming changes at 192.9E3, where we've got the 3 years. So that's what we were looking at doing on all of those there that we've got listed. Is that what you were asking? Are we looking at 2 years, 3 years, or?
yes, so may I
Sure.
follow up? So you have determining applicability, and then you have extending the deadline for conforming changes. And then you've got a set of issues that relate to what happens when you have an increase in dwelling density, right? That would trigger requirements for pipelines that are existing that are now going to be subject to regulation. So I'm just wondering how all of those fit together.
Okay, yeah, well, first, 3 years is total that you would have. Okay, the 2 years, if you see a change later, it would be like a class location change in 192.611. That would give you 2 years. Let's say 5 years out, you find something, then you have 2 years at that point. We were giving the total of 3 in the beginning to give operators enough time to identify it and to make it applicable. So we thought the 3 years gave enough time, and then after you get that done, if you find something else, it would only be 2 years.
I'm going to interrupt the council conversation, the committee conversation, because it sounds like we're back online. Can we get, so are there any public comments? Okay. So we are going to give folks a minute to call in. The call-in number's up on the slide. No questions? Okay, so why don't we do that, and let's,
It's a little lengthy, so the first part will be the introductory language, and the second slide will be the actual recommended amendment.
so before we do that, though, I mean, there were a lot of public comments that had specific suggestions, and I just, if we put the language up, are we going to discuss those, or?
You can see, you'll see it, yes.
Okay. Then go ahead, sir. Okay, we're trying to get the side slides moved to the middle.
We're just going to go over what our recommended amendments are.
Okay, so here are the recommended amendments for the committee to consider. Extend the time frame to 2 years for a Type A Area 2 line that became regulated in the future due to new dwellings. That's for it to be applicable, to come into compliance, for it to be applicable. Add a notification process similar to the process endorsed by the committee for the proposed 192.607 in RIN 1 to address the use of composite pipe materials in existing and new Type A Area 2 pipelines. Extend the deadline in 192.8B for determining applicability from 6 months to 2 years after the effective date of the rule. And extend the deadline for the conforming changes at 192.9E3, E4, 192.452, 192.113, and 192.619 to 3 years after the effective date of the rule. Ensure that the language for designated newly regulated gathering pipelines is as clear as possible. And for the MAOP determination based on the 5-year high operating pressure or other criteria based on a combination of operating conditions and other tests and design, that will be part of a notification to PHMSA, which will include a no objection. And as part of Sarah's comment within the bullets 3 and 4, it is to move that applicability deadline from 6 months to 2 years from the effective date of the rule. But you could identify it before then, and then you'd get extra time on the total of the 3-year piece. So you can also, if you identify it earlier, you get more time to put it into compliance. Thank you. Oh, is there another slide?
Okay, Sarah?
So another clarifying question, just because we've gone through so much in this committee for a lot of substantive issues. The notification process that we decided on as it related to 192.607, can you describe that again?
Well, it would be a notification to PHMSA that would outline the request. And from that, PHMSA would review it, and we'd have 90 days to review it unless we came back asking for more information or telling the operator that we could not complete it in 90 days, and then we would give them a timeline that we would complete it.
Thank you.
Ron?
Yeah, Ron Bradley Pico. So I'm just wanting us to talk for a minute about, I think it was Keith Cole's recommendation, and sometimes when people say their names fast, you don't really hear them too clearly, so I think it was Keith Cole, regarding Type A, Area 2, and renaming it Type C or Type Charlie. I'm not sure I've got my head around that yet. I mean, because it sounds like going from Type A, it's almost like rewording everything, but I would like to hear some thoughts on how that lands, or if that should be included up here for some discussion, and acknowledging that I haven't sorted it out in my head yet, but I just didn't want to let it go.
All right, good. John?
Sure. Just to let you know, Mr. Bradley, that the language in there, the second to last bullet that says ensure that the language for designating newly regulated gathering lines is as clear as possible is to cover that. We're going to look at class type C or the verbiage that's coming from RP 1182, and we understand, we see the benefit of something like that. But we didn't want to get into a debate as to what exactly that language should be, and just give us the discretion to make sure that, and the responsibility to make sure that it's written as clearly as possible.
So, and I had some, listening to the public comments, it just seems that, I just wanted to make sure I understood where we are on some of these. There was a question about plastic pipe under 192.963. Is it just transmission or is it all? Do we have clarification on that, or do we need to have a discussion on that? There was a question about the documentation of the 5-year high on MAOP. Do we need to have any discussion on that? There's the question about the record keeping on requirements for qualifications, and should these apply to gathering lines as well as transmission? And then there was a issue raised by Ms. Friend about the role of the state in a no objection letter. So I raised those four just to see if we need to have a discussion on those.
Well, I'll start with the last one first. As far as the states, in the 607 procedure, if the state is a agent or is involved where you need to involve them, they are involved. If you go back and read in the code, it always has that the operator send that to the state. We have an internal process where we get with the states on that as needed. So I think that's the answer to that. The next item you asked was on documentation, I believe.
Documentation of the MAOP.
Okay, documentation of the MAOP. That's why we added the last bullet is on MAOP determination based upon the 5-year grandfather. So in other words, if you had the documentation, you would not have to come to PHMSA. If you did not have full documentation, then the point of putting in the other items is you could come in with some of those items and come to us to determine what that MAOP should be for a grandfather. So that's what the intent. And I've forgotten the first one. That's why I
So
started with the last.
the other two, one was the qualifications, and should they apply to gathering lines as well as transmission?
Well, as far as we understand the comment on welder qualifications on transmission, again, is early on in this process. In our original public meetings and everything, we told the public, we told everybody in this room that we would not have the same applicable documentation for the gas gathering that we did for the transmission, and the way we will write it up will be based upon what we've told in all the public meetings and what we've done from day one on this rulemaking. The committee's welcome to suggest otherwise, but that would be our intent, since that's what we've said we would do.
I'll come back to that one. The other one was the question about whether, with plastic pipe, whether 192.9B3 was just transmission or everything.
Well, as far as plastic pipe, based upon how in 192, whether it's 153, 159, 124, is they would be applicable as addressed in that portion of the code. We were not planning to restrict them.
Okay. So coming back to the concern about the welder qualifications, though, I sort of look at all of this as whether it's a gathering line or a transmission line, if it's a pipe and it's carrying natural gas under pressure, it seems it really doesn't matter. What we're looking for is what are the right qualifications to make sure that the pipe is safe. And so I guess I would wonder why we would have a distinction about the welder qualifications we would want to have for one kind of pipe than we do with another kind of pipe that might have the same physical attributes. So I see several tents. Yeah, so, okay, Ron.
Thank you, Chair. Ron Bradley Pico. Just trying to, two different slides up here, because which one's being edited? The middle one or the side ones? I didn't watch when they're being edited. I think we got two different,
I think you're right. Are we working off the middle one?
somebody hit a key and make it edit so I can see which one moves.
Still the one on the right.
Should. Well, look at the last word.
not.
PHMSA over.
So they're not the same.
Somehow you sort of got configuration control loss. Oh, it's a sync issue? Oh, they are two different. One computer. So we thought one screen was going to OMB and the other one was going to. Don't write that down. It's off the record.
Okay, so do we have clarification of which document we're working off of? The middle one. Okay. So assuming it's the middle one, Ron, did you have another, okay, you're just seeking clarification. Okay, Andy?
This is Andy Drake with Enridge. I just want to make sure I'm clear. I think that the comment that you make about MAOP kind of helps the issue that I think was raised earlier in public comment about not everything has pressure, monitoring device on it, but you can use gradients, you could use other approaches. Is that where you're going, Steve? Is that what that is intended to provide, is some other way of? Okay, I think that
Yeah.
helps address that concern.
I mean, it may be that you pressure tested the pipeline. It may be that you know the material properties, in other words, the wall thickness, the grade, and all of that. And you can take a combination of all of it and come up with a modified MAOP. In other words, especially where you don't have the records for the 5 years, And it may be that you've got the pressure test and the design, and you
Sure.
don't need the 5 years.
That would be the best. I think the question that Chairman Danner asked, I just trying to make sure I'm in sync with it, was some of the exemptions, particularly like welder qualifications, some of the things, the intent, I think, was, and I'm speaking for Steve, so was to be consistent with current regulated gas gathering requirements and not try to jump this group of gas gathering past currently regulated gas gathering to be transmission oriented. I see shaking his head yes. That was the logic to why. Now, the question about whether, I don't know that anybody's got a big heartburn about new big gas gathering pipes having qualification requirements for welders. I think the problem would be retroactive or other things like that. I'm looking kind of over there at the room. I see people generally shaking their head yes. So I just caution, if is the juice worth the squeeze? We're trying to be consistent. Okay, that was the intent of this effort. But if we want to do something, I think we would want to be very careful about what it is, because I think we're going to create a
Well,
bunch of
yeah.
other drag that we have to deal with.
Thank you, and I understand that. The problem I have is that, basically we know where we want to get to in time, and how do you start that discussion? Because eventually, I think we would want to have welder qualifications for everything that has the same physical attributes in time, unless for some reason it's important to have them on transmission, but unimportant to have them on gas gathering lines. But if at what point do you start that conversation, or do you acknowledge a placeholder so that we'll get to it eventually? Or do we just say it's not our issue right now?
Specific to welder qualifications, I don't sense that that's a big issue on new pipes going forward. So I think, and I think this conversation, I think this is important actually, in that this isn't the end, this is the beginning. So we're trying to get started, and being on par with what's currently regulated is a good start. But if we have a specific concern, then I think this group can vet that. I'm just speaking for me, and looking over here, I don't see anybody shaking their head no about welder qualifications on new jurisdictional gathering pipes.
So, I guess, at some point, and I don't know where these would go in the rules, but maybe there needs to be some sort of memorialization of intent language that, we're doing a lot of things right now that are not full steps because we're cognizant that we have to go through a transition phase that could be very lengthy. But at some point, we need to say we're not saying no forever, and then we're going to get to things eventually. But I think even if we don't have even that statement, it could be used that, well, the committee decided at one point you don't need those, so in the future they're going to say, well, the committee back then already talked about it, and they decided we don't need welder qualifications, which is not exactly what we're doing. So I just feel like we should have some memorialization of intent that, eventually we're going to have consistent regulation across the board. We just can't do it now because of time and expense and resources and other things. Yeah, and then Mark.
Just the answer is if you look at what we had planned to do was to put Type A Area 2 under Part D. And Part D1 says this, if a line is new, replaced, relocated, or otherwise changed, the design, installation, construction, initial inspection, and initial testing must be in accordance with the requirements of this part applicable to transmission lines. And that's just what Andy was saying back, and I guess our intent was to have that. You've got a pressure test. You've got to do procedure testing for welding, and your welders would have to be tested. So I think, but not on the existing lines that we were grandfathered in, but on new, relocated, replaced. And that's the same way that happened on transmission lines back in 1970.
All right, I think that with regard to welder qualifications, that does it for the larger issue. I'm still thinking there needs to be some sort of boilerplate. But let me get to Mark first.
Well, so maybe, Steve, your intervention just it'd be helpful maybe if we could make that a little clearer, because it's sort of in the ether right now. Hearing you explain it, I feel better about that. As a practical matter, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of the formalism of trying to keep everything in lockstep, sort of overwhelming the need to advance what we know is good practice and prudent practice. And it would seem to me, being a layperson, that having, certified welders as being an important, common sense kind of thing. So is there some way, A, to be more clear on what's being intended here? And B, maybe we just do need to be clearer that our expectation is that when and wherever PHMSA can add, welder qualifications in this revision, they should.
So I guess where I'm coming from is, let's get off welder qualifications for a moment, but because I think that there's a specific answer to that. But I think what I'm thinking about is some sort of preamble to these rules that basically acknowledges that these are transitional and that, that we are going to be making amendments in the future, and that we're on a glide path to having more consistent regulation across the board. So let me get to Andy first.
This is Andy Drake with Enbridge. I think that's very congruent with our position too, and that's one of the reasons we're supporting facts and data to make a better choice in the next tranche. And that's why I think that's actually very consistent with how we approached the integrity rules 15 years ago. It's like that's where HCA's came from. I mean, it wasn't the end; it was the beginning. And the next tranche, and the next tranche, which we just went through, what is an MCA? I think that's logical. I do think your point's well taken, Mark, and that is we are applying, but I think part of the exemption is about going backwards on welder qualifications. That's not practical, but going forwards. So if we can clean that language up, I think that's appropriate.
I was basically going to make the point you just made related to the journey, and this is just the beginning, and I think we have some vote language that hopefully add the clarity that we need here. So.
All right, Diane?
Thank you. Just as a backdrop, it is a little bit of a disconnect because the webcast is on a delay. So I apologize if I sound a little confused. The voting, if someone could put up on the webcast the slide that we're going to be voting on so that I could refer to it while I'm talking, that would be helpful. One of the questions that I have is I am a little confused as we're breaking this out on some of the specifics on what we're voting on. The first part, from memory, because I don't see it on the webcast, the first part where we're voting on the 2-year phase-in, I'm not opposed to, and I think that's fine. The others, when we're talking on the composite type, also I'm not opposed to. I just have a question on if there are industry standards. Again, I'm looking at the webcast. There's not, the voting slide isn't up there, so it's hard for me to refer to remember all of the different details. I am confused on some of the specifics on exactly what we're voting on from the different things. So I just wondered if we could take all the different specific lines and go through it and make sure that we're clear for each one, and maybe take a minute to make sure that if for each one we have questions, we take a moment to make sure that everyone has questions to that specific line that we might be called upon to address and vote on. Thank you. That's my thoughts. And I still don't see up the slide that we'll be voting on. Thank you.
Okay, if it's not there now, it should be coming up. Can you tell her that?
Diane, could you describe what you're seeing right now?
Right now I'm seeing a lot of people looking like they're waiting around.
Okay. Maybe refresh your screen, because what we're seeing is actually, what we're showing is on the webcast is the actual vote language.
Hold on, now I just got pictures of. Hold on now. We just got out of it. No,
Anything different? Are you seeing anything different, Diane?
Yeah, I'm just refreshing it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Andy, while we're waiting, you want to comment?
It's up now, so thank you.
In the interest, I appreciate what Ms. Berman's saying, and that is, Commissioner Berman is saying, perhaps in the meantime, we could get John to read this slide and just try to articulate what we're trying to address with each one of these bullets. I think that's constructive for all of us, actually, at this point. Just
Yeah, I think that that's a good idea, Andy. John? So, proposal has been made that you, basically, we've got the 7 bullets in front of us, or 6 bullets in front of us. If you could basically read those and then provide a short narration for each to summarize what we're trying to do. And, I mean, I think that for those of us here, I think that would be helpful too. And I understand for Commissioner Berman being having the benefit of being in the room here, I think that would be helpful for her.
Okay, very good. So what we have here, obviously we don't have the standard language from the vote. So what we have is just the bullets of what the recommended amendments to the rule that the staff is recommending to the committee. The first bullet states, extend the time frame to 2 years for Type A Area 2 lines that become regulated in the future due to new dwellings. So, right, we're looking at not just what are the Type A Area 2 lines that are in existence today, but what could happen in the future, and they get one dwelling within the regulated area, they become regulated. We're going to give 2 years for an operator to comply with the regulations. That's consistent with how we handle Type A and Type B lines today. The second bullet says, add a notification process similar to the process endorsed by the committee for the proposed 192-607 in RIN 1 to address the use of composite pipe materials in existing and new Type A Area 2 lines. So when we were doing the first rule, RIN 1, and we adopted the provisions in 607, we adopted a no objection process that operators could vary from the regulations in 607 if they gave PHMSA notification, and we had 90 days, so the obligation was on PHMSA to then object in some way within a certain time period. But it wasn't an open-ended time period, it was a 90-day limit. So the onus was on PHMSA to then respond within a specified time period. This allows the use of composite pipe materials to continue in the gathering industry that is not currently allowed today in gas transmission lines. Composite pipe materials have been used in gathering for a long period of time, and we thought it was important to continue their use, especially in replacement and in new projects that were consistent with the other lines that are already in the ground. We also, under the third bullet, proposed to extend the deadline in 192.8B for determining the applicability from 6 months to 2 years after the effective date of the rule. This is similar to the first bullet where we give the operators up to 2 years to determine the applicability of the regulations to their lines. We would then extend the deadline for all the conforming changes from 3 years. Again, this is a concurrent requirement, so you have 3 years total to comply. You don't get to go 2 years and then 3 years for a total of 5. It's a total of 3. So if you are able to determine your applicability within 6 months, you have 2.5 years to comply with those requirements. And then at the very end there, we say ensure that the language for designated newly regulated gas gathering lines is as clear as possible. So that's addressing the concern raised by Mr. Coyle about, possibly using the phrase Type C, consistent with RP 1182, instead of Type A Area 2. And we'll make sure that we take a look at that very hard and make sure that the whole rule is written as clear as possible. And then the very last bullet there is the MAO determination based on a 5-year operating pressure or other criteria based on a combination of operational conditions, other tests, and design with notification of PHMSA. And again, also include a no objection process, as we mentioned earlier, similar to what we adopted under 192-607. And I believe that was discussed, with length between Andy and Stephen.
All right.
And then the last part where we're trying to tie in is this language on the side to make it very clear that, regarding the welder concern, the welder qualification concern, is that, there's language, I believe this is even in the proposed rule, if a line is new, replaced, or relocated, or otherwise changed, the design, installation, construction, initial inspection, initial testing must be in accordance with the requirements of this part applicable to transmission lines. I think it's important to note that the requirements we were talking about before about not applying to were just simply the record requirements that were adopted in the transmission rule, and not the qualifications for welders themselves. The welders that will be installing these lines will have to be qualified in accordance with these regulations. All we were talking about were the added record requirements that we proposed to adopt for gas transmission lines.
All right.
Hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Commissioner Berman, does that help?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure, that we kind of went through each bullet and made sure that we took a pause to get from folks if they were comfortable with each bullet or not, so that we kind of were establishing everyone's comfort level, and then if there was anything that needed to be changed, we weren't waiting till sort of the end to hear about any concerns or doing it in a group. So that was my focus, is just making sure that we kind of worked through that. So thank you. And it was hard just because I wasn't seeing it. So
Yeah, I totally understand. All right, we still have some cards up, so we may not be totally done with the conversation yet. So, Sarah?
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really helpful to go through all of those. So thank you, John, and thank you, Diane, for suggesting it. On the question of conformance and the 3 years, I just want to make sure I understand. That relates to existing lines, right? So new lines that go in would be subject to the requirements right away. Because that's how it reads in the original rule. Okay. And then on the notification process, there would be a window there where you would be considering whether to respond.
Yes.
And during that window, they would not be allowed to put in the composite pipeline. So they have to wait out that window until you either respond or you decide not to.
Yeah, not to be speak for my lawyers behind me, but I guess they could put it in. But if they get the no objection letter afterwards, then we object, then they have a problem. Yes.
Okay. So then those were my questions, and then a comment. We're pulling from the regulation, the sort of timelines for the currently regulated gathering lines to extend a deadline here. But in the rule as to this original set of requirements, actually, the deadlines are shorter for some of these. So, for example, we have carrying out damage prevention, 18 months. Establishing MAOP, also 18 months. Line markers, 2 years. Public education, 2 years, and 3 years for the rest. So I wonder why we're pulling from the language to extend the time period here, but not to be consistent on the places where we actually gave operators a shorter period of time. And then that leads me to a question. So I think the assumption is more time is better, right? But part of what I'm struggling with is we don't know which segment of pipelines we're ultimately going to be regulating, because that's a conversation we have to have. So whether it's a very small group or whether it's a much larger group, obviously I think that would impact my opinion about the deadlines.
Does anyone want to take those on?
We're doing some quick reading real quick.
All right. Well, while you're doing your research, I'm going to turn to Andy. You want to?
I would like to hear the answer to your question. I'm ready to make a proposal, but I would like to hear at least some feedback on that question, just to make sure that we don't get our cart and horse out of order.
I'm just wondering why we're doing it differently now.
So I'm going to turn to John now.
Yeah, so just real quick, and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, what Sarah was referring to in terms of the time period was the effective dates that were adopted in the gas gathering rule from 2006. And so we had some staggering of dates. A lot of them were 18 months that were adopted in 2006 rules. So Sarah's asking, why did we, in this situation, we were going to 2 years. I just think, in this scenario, and given the amount of mileage that are potentially impacted, and the breadth and scope of this rule, that the extra 6 months may be quite appropriate in this scenario.
You're going to 3 years, right?
Yeah, it's a 3 year, you're right, sorry. So we're going to a 2 year period for identification and then a 3 year period for actual requirements. So we just think in this scenario that 3 years is a better timeframe.
Okay, Andy is ready to make a motion, but before he does, he's going to wait for me to survey the room and see if there's any more discussion on this. Anything we need clarification on? Yes, Mary.
On the section of language that says "or otherwise changed," it kind of leaves it open for a state to kind of pile on to say, or otherwise changed. Well, you change the soil around the pipe, or you put a tap on it, or those things. Is it too wide open, and should it be tightened up to just say new or fully replaced, something along those lines?
Which bullet are you looking at?
It was there, now I don't see it on the screen, but it was on the part where D1, was it? Oh, there it is. The "or otherwise changed" is pretty wide open, and sometimes the states could add that to their own interpretation.
Oh, I see.
That's our standard language, Ms. Palkovich, that we have in the regulations. We even have it today.
But her point is well taken. You have to watch those states. So,
Especially Washington.
all right. I'm seeing no tents up other than Andy's. So, going once, going twice, going 3 times. Andy, go ahead and make a motion. And
Base language,
Yeah, and then D1. Okay, well, this is Andy Drake with Enbridge. I was going to make a motion, but that went away. So I'm going to read this way over here now.
Start with the middle.
Start with the middle? Committee voting slide on paragraphs 192.9C through E and 192.619 newly regulated gas gathering. The proposed rules as published in the Federal Register and the draft regulatory evaluation with regard to the minimum safety standards in paragraphs 192C and D and E for regulated gas gathering pipelines are technically feasible, reasonable, cost-effective, and practicable if the following changes are made. There we go. 1, extend the time frame from 2 years for Type A Area 2 lines that become regulated in the future due to new dwellings, to add a notification process similar to the process endorsed by the committee for the proposed paragraph 192.607 in RIN-1 to address the use of composite pipe materials in existing and new Type A Area 2 lines. 3, extend the deadline in paragraph 192.8B for determining applicability from 6 months to 2 years after the effective date of this rule. Extend the deadline for the conforming changes in paragraphs 192.9E3, 192.9E4, 192.452, 192.13, and 192.619 to 3 years after the effective date of the rule. Ensure that the language for the designated newly regulated gathering pipes is as clear as possible, Type A, Area 2 versus Type C. MAOP determination based on a 5-year high operating pressure or other criteria based on the combination of operating conditions not that quick, other tests and design with notification by PHMSA to include a no objection process, consistent with 192.607. Yeah, okay. Now on to D1. There we go. Type B lines, an operator of a Type B regulated onshore gathering line must comply with the following requirements. If a line is new, replaced, relocated, or otherwise changed, the design, installation, construction, initial inspection, and initial testing must be in accordance with the requirements of this part applicable to the transmission lines.
Robert Hill, second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded. If there's no discussion, let's go right into the roll call.
All right, I was giving a second for the webcast to catch up so Diane could see as well. I think we should be good. We'll go right in. Yes or no? Ron Bradley?
Yes.
Andy Drake?
Yes.
Rich Worsinger?
Yes.
Chad Zamarin?
Yes.
Mary Palkovich?
Yes.
John Airy?
Yes.
Mark Brownstein?
Yes.
Sarah Gossman?
Yes.
Robert Hill?
Yes.
David Danner?
Yes?
Sarah Longan?
Yes.
And Diane Berman?
Yes.
All right, and with that, it's unanimous.
All right, and the motion passes. All right, we are going to take a short 10-minute break, and by that I mean 10 minutes. We'll be back here at 3 o'clock and start. The secretary is going to visit us at 4:30, so we're going to see how much we can get done in the remaining hour and a half. So we're in recess.
It's a way to make sure that people are qualified and check, double check that there's people that are ready. It just seems strange to us that you have this requirement on the transmission lines and then not also apply. Oh, yeah. And then that's going to be depressing for the town.
Don't take our hand.
So 50 years. I don't know. I guess they have to have like a meter.
I think we dropped
If you're planning on taking that, it's easier to go out to the Maryland area. They're like working on developing a metro as a Maryland, but they're going to. We don't get it. There's nobody gets it. So it's like Montgomery and Howard County. We just say like verbs. Annapolis is kind of. Was that 97?
Okay, folks, we're going to get going again. Please take your seats. Okay, everybody, we're back. We are back on the record. So first, let's, Mr. Nanny, do you want to give us a clarification on what we just voted on?
Wait till the slides get up. Just one point before we go to the section 6. The type A area 2 was deleted on the last slide when the vote was taken. We've added it, and just to make everybody aware, type A area 2 and type B lines.
Thank you. I think that that was generally understood that that's what we're voting on. Unless anyone has an objection, I don't think we need to revote that item. So, okay, we're good. Moving on then to scope. Do you have any introductory comments for this section, or should we just go right into the briefing?
We'll just go right into it.
All right.
Can you do me one favor? Can you remove that slide and make it where that's slide 114 instead of 115? Okay. Well, just starting is on my computer, it's slide 114, so it's 115 I know up there. Is again on gas gathering for 192.8B and 8C. PHMSA had proposed to revise 192.8C to define a new category of regulated gathering lines, which we had determined as being type A area 2, and it would consist of pipe in a class 1 location with a diameter equal to or greater than 8.625 inches, metallic with an MAOP greater than equal to 20% of SMICE, or non-metallic with an MAOP greater than 125 PSIG. We were proposed in 192.8B we would require operators to make this determination within 6 months of the effective date of the rule. Going to the next slide, again, some of the public comments. Various industry groups stress that the present regulations are an adequate basis for safety of gathering lines, and that increasing the scope of regulated pipelines should only be considered after appropriate study and data collection. And again, PHMSA's comments to that is that recent developments in the field of gas exploration and production, such as the shale gas, indicates that existing framework for regulating gas gathering needs to be updated to address the higher operating pressures, the larger diameter pipe, and it being in more populated areas. These type gas gathering pipelines have a similar risk to gas transmission pipelines, which we have stated earlier in this meeting. Going to slide 116, some of the other public comments we got is numerous local government groups, individuals, and private interest groups contend that increased regulation extended to Class 1 locations is appropriate due to similarity in operating characteristics to transmission lines and due to increased potential for corrosion. PHMSA, recent developments again in the field of gas exploration and production, such as the shale gas, indicate that the existing framework for regulating gas gathering lines may need to be expanded. Higher operating pressures in larger diameter pipe represents increased risk comparable to transmission pipelines. Slide 117, some additional public comments. One operator is opposed to an additional regulation for type B gathering lines and currently unregulated smaller diameter, lower pressure gathering lines, as these lines do not fit the profile of higher risk pipelines that are targeted by PHMSA in the original rulemaking. Note, type B gathering lines with an MAOP less than 20% SMICE are non-metallic with an MAOP less than greater than 125 pounds per square inch gauge. Slide 118, PHMSA's comment back. The notice of proposed rulemaking did not propose to regulate any additional type B lines or add regulatory requirements for type B lines. PHMSA proposed in this regulation to include large diameter, high pressure lines that are being deployed to gather and process gas in populated areas, such as the new unconventional production facilities for shale gas that results in the higher volumes and pressures in the gas gathering line segments. Slide 119, some additional public comments. API stated that gas gathering lines that are 16 inches in outside diameter and operate at a maximum pressure of 20% or more SMICE have the potential to pose a higher risk and therefore greater consequences and should be targeted for regulation as opposed to 8 5/8 inches and greater proposed in the notice. Slide 120, some additional public comments. GPA urged PHMSA to modify the criteria applicable to steel gathering pipelines in the rule to a diameter of greater than 16 inches. The Texas Pipeline Association recommended that expansion of regulated gathering pipelines be limited to metallic gathering lines in Class 1 locations that have a diameter of 16 inches or greater until PHMSA has an opportunity to gather additional information on Class 1 gathering lines. Slide 121. PHMSA's comment back. PHMSA proposes in this regulation to include those large diameter, high pressure lines that are being deployed to gather and process gas from the new unconventional production facilities such as shale gas production that results in the higher volumes and pressures in the gas gathering line segments. Based on additional information provided in response to the notice, PHMSA believes that the purpose can be achieved by increasing the minimum size standard to greater than 12.75 inches in outside diameter. Slide 122, some additional public comments. Regulated gathering lines should be limited to those having a PIR greater than 100 feet. The risk associated with lines having a lesser PIR is lower and they should not be regulated. Others noted that the GAO report concerns were focused in the area of large diameter, high pressure lines, and that some representatives felt that the large diameter limit should be 16-inch pipe or larger. PHMSA's comment. As stated in previous slides, the objective of the rule is to address, again, as I've stated earlier, large diameter, high pressure lines resulting from non-conventional production. The use of the PIR concept is a way to address the risk of these larger diameter and higher pressure gas gathering lines in Class 1 locations. PHMSA agrees the PIR of such lines should be greater than 100 feet, but not limited maybe to 100 feet. Page 123, some additional public comments. In December of 2018 and June of 2019, PHMSA received 4 supplemental comment letters from trade associations. These letters were posted on the docket. GPA Midstream and API urged PHMSA to revise the proposed rule to regulate lines greater than 12 inches. TPA and IPAA jointly urged PHMSA to revise the proposed rule to regulate lines greater than 16 inches in a Class 1 location or where a pipeline in a Class 2 location is not covered by the parameters of Type B lines. PHMSA suggests that the committee consider newly regulated gas gathering Type A Class 1 lines that consist of any line greater than 12 and 3/4 inch through 16-inch diameter with at least one building for human occupancy or other impacted site in the PIR, and that all lines greater than 16-inch be a part of it. Slide 124. PHMSA suggests that the committee consider newly regulated gas gathering Type A Class 1 lines to consist of, again, any line greater than 12.75 inches through 16 inches diameter with at least one building for human occupancy or other impacted site in the PIR, and all lines greater than 16 inches diameter. Other impacted site would be a small, well-defined outside area such as a playground, recreational area, outdoor theater, or other place of public assembly that is occupied by 20 or more persons on at least 5 days a week for 10 weeks in any 12-month period. The days and weeks need not be consecutive, and freeways, interstates, and other principal 4 lanes or more arterial roadways. Slide 125. Again, some additional public comments. In a letter dated June the 10th, 2019, API and GPA Midstream support inclusion of a PRR limit which will help to further focus the regulations on gathering lines that present a higher risk to public safety. Although API has not reached consensus support on this issue, GPA urges PHMSA to expand the PRR limitation to 24 inches diameter. PHMSA suggests that the committee consider newly regulated gas gathering Type A Class 1 lines to consist, again, as I've stated earlier, any line greater than 12.75 inches through 16 inches diameter with at least one building for human occupancy or other impacted site in the PIR, and all lines greater than 16 inches in diameter. Slide 126, some additional public comments that we got. GPA Midstream as well as TPA and IPAA jointly proposed in cases where PHMSA is not known to allow operators to include all pipe with an MAOP greater than 125 PSIG, same as plastic pipe, in lieu of establishing SMICE per 49 Part 192 Appendix C. And again, based on previous comments and ongoing monitoring of API committee standard, PHMSA suggests that the committee consider if this requirement should be included in the final rule. Slide page 127. Public comments. TPA and IPAA jointly propose that PHMSA withdraw the proposed requirement for emergency plans. PHMSA, we believe that emergency plans are appropriate to include for newly regulated high-stress lines. Failure to include this would not be responsive to the explicit GAO recommendation to include this requirement. Slide 128, some additional public comments. TPA and IPAA jointly urge PHMSA to clarify proposed Part 192.9C to clarify that new requirements proposed for gas transmission pipelines would not apply to gas gathering pipelines. PHMSA previously identified this needed change to the proposed regulatory text. Note that these clarifications might be included in the gas transmission rule if it is promulgated first. Going to slide 129, and this is again to go over a previous slide earlier today that we went over, is that the unregulated or the gas gathering total miles, the current estimate is 426,109 miles. Gas gathering, as far as what we estimate Type A Area 2, which would be high stress, greater than 8.625 inches. And again, in the proposed rulemaking, the 2018 estimate, if the diameter was greater than 8.625, greater than equal to 8.625 and less than 12.75 inches in diameter, we estimate through 2018 to be approximately 46,000 miles. Of 12.75 inches in diameter, we estimate it to be 19,665 miles. And again, in the area that we're proposing the rule to be applicable to, which would be greater than 12.75 inches through 16 inches, and also greater than 16 inches, as you can see, it's 12,604 miles for the 12 up through 16 inches, and greater than 16, it's 12,500 for a total mileage that this rule would be applicable to of 25,104 miles. Going to slide 130, again, as far as what we estimate unregulated gathering pipelines from 8-inch through greater than 24, this is what PHMSA estimates the mileage to be of the various diameters. And we had this just to give everybody in the committee an idea as far as what the diameters were. And going up to the 426,000, of course, when you add this up, it's not going to be 426. It's going to be less than 8 inches down through 2 inches will be the other mileage. Going to slide 131. Another item that we wanted to just make sure that the committee saw was what is a potential impact radius, or a PIR, which we've talked about during this meeting. And again, the PIR is the radius of a circle, and the radius of the circle is defined, as you can see, the R equals 0.69 square root of P over D, and the 0.69 is for really transmission quality, a more lean gas. 0.73 is for rich gas, which is probably what almost all of the gas gathering lines will probably carry. In Part 192, 903 for integrity management, we use the 0.69. You know, one item here that we may want to use for the gas gathering that PHMSA would recommend is that we use 0.73, and we think that will be in similar to what some of the API RP 1182 is proposing. So anyway, I'm not going through what P&D and everything is here on the slide, but I think you've probably read it by now. So going to slide 132. And slide 132 just shows, as far as the dwelling, how the PIR is actually used. You can see the actual PIR circle, and if it touches the house, then you circle completely around, just like these two circles show, and the entire footage there would be the regulated gas gathering mileage, which is very similar to what integrity management is for transmission lines. Going to slide 133. Again, what we tried to show here is to just give everybody an idea for various sizes. As you can see, the bottom portion is 8 inch, which is the blue, and you can see there that even up to 1,400 pounds operating pressure, your PIR is going to be about 200 feet. But you can also see if you had a 30-inch pipeline and it was operating above 1,000 pounds up to 1,400, will give you an idea there that your PIR can go from probably around 660 feet up to about 800 feet. And so we just wanted to give everybody a quick snapshot of how the PIR pressure versus diameter actually plays together. Going to slide 134. And this slide here is for what is for GPAC discussion later. Here's what we wanted to do in this slide. You can see greater than 16 inches be a part of it, and then diameters greater than 12.75 inches up through and including 16 inches with at least one building for human occupancy or other impacted site in the PRR would also be applicable. Some other items that we wanted to put out for the committee to consider if you want to. We're not saying you have to discuss them, but one would be a diameter greater than 8.625 inches up through and including 12.75 inches, which with at least one building for human occupancy or other impacted site in the PRR. Is the committee wanting us to, instead of the 12 inches, to consider this option as part of the rule? And then the other is a diameter of 8 inches with at least one building for human occupancy or other impacted site in the PRR. Again, this is just some alternatives that it's up to the committee if you want to discuss them or not. Going to slide 135, and Dave, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. All right, so we will now hear public comment from folks in the room who would like to discuss the scope issue. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Martinez, and I have the pleasure of being the chair for the API RP 1182 effort. And I just want to generally say that, for over a year and a half now, a broad group of stakeholders has been working to do a lot of what you've just done here, of define, what are the best practices for larger diameter pipelines, and what is a larger diameter pipeline, as the GAO asked you to look at. I'll say that generally speaking, we have a consensus that the greater than 12.75 inch is an appropriate diameter to start these efforts at, and so we support that. As well, generally speaking, we support the framework that you've created there in the slides as well. I do want to say that I appreciate the encouragement from PHMSA, as well as support from Mr. Nanny and the input that he's been giving to the group, and just really appreciate the opportunity to try and move forward pipeline safety. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have time for one more public comment. Oh, all right. Chad, do you have a clarifying question?
I do, just so that we make sure we're all talking about the right thing. If Steve, if we can look at slide 132 real fast, I just want to be clear about the graphic that's shown. You're showing the extent of the regulated gas gathering to be the outer edges of the PIRs, and not considering anything like buffer area or any additional additions. I think that the correct extent should be from the center point of each of those circles, not from the outer edges of those circles. Can you just clarify that?
All right, so
that is consistent with what is an impact, what pipe can create an HCA in transmission, just Chad just read, just to be sure. Center point to center point defines the pipe that can create high consequence, not the edges of the circle.
Right. Right. My point being that if you move that circle just one, foot to the left of its center point, then that center point would not have the potential to impact that structure. It's been a long time since I've done PIR kind of analysis, but I just looking at that, it struck me as unless there was something I'm not recalling correctly, I just thought it'd be. And maybe that's something we need to follow up on, but I just wanted to make sure we were looking at the right thing.
So this is Dave Danner. I looked at that and I saw, because the structure is actually touching the circles, that building is arguably got at least part of it within those circles. So that's how I read
My only
that.
point is, if you're worried about what point along the pipeline can impact that structure, it's from the center point of each circle to the center point of the other circle. If you looked, if you moved that circle 1 foot to the left, in other words, you moved its center point 1 foot to the left, it would no longer be touching that structure. So I believe that point would not be, considered included. The only potential impacts that can occur from that pipeline are from the center point of one circle to the center point of the other, not from the outer extent of one circle to the outer extent of the other.
Go ahead. Alan?
Yeah, Chad, this is Alan. We're not redefining PIR, so appreciate your input there, and we'll make sure we're correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So we need to take a break at 3:30. Okay, so we're going to take a few minutes, so bear with me while we get the website taken.
Just to clarify, this is for our webcast to switch over to the new link.
Do we need to tell the people online to switch over? No, we're good.